11 students vanished on a quiet autumn morning, and the town of Pine Ridge, Colorado, spent decades pretending it had never happened. For more than 25 years, the story of what occurred at Pine Ridge High School in October 1998 was buried under silence, rumors, and unanswered questions. The official investigation ended with no suspects, no bodies, and no explanation. Life in the small mountain town slowly moved on, but the empty desks in that classroom were never truly forgotten. Then everything changes. When a demolition crew begins tearing down the abandoned gymnasium behind the old school, their equipment breaks through the concrete foundation and reveals a sealed underground chamber that was never listed on the building plans. Inside are 11 decaying backpacks arranged in a perfect circle. The discovery forces Detective Emily Carter to return to a mystery she spent half her life trying to escape. A mystery tied to the charismatic school counselor, Dr. Leonard Hale, his devoted student, Laura Whitmore, and a psychological experiment that was never meant to end. This is the story of the Pine Ridge 11, a case of manipulation, secrets, and a truth that refused to stay buried. The town of Cedar Falls, Colorado, had the particular quality of light that only mountain towns possess in late September, sharp and golden, and just a little melancholy, as if the landscape itself understood that beauty was temporary. At 7:14 in the morning, Emily Carter sat at the counter of Denny's Diner on Main Street with a cup of black coffee cooling in front of her and a crossword puzzle she hadn't touched. Through the window, she could see the Rockies catching the first hard light of day, their peaks already dusted with early snow. She came here every Thursday morning. Lou behind the counter knew her order before she gave it. The couple in the corner booth, the Hendersons, waved without looking up from their phones. A kid on a bicycle rattled past the window with a backpack swinging off one shoulder. Cedar Falls was exactly what it looked like, a town where nothing bad was supposed to happen anymore. "You hear they're finally tearing down the old gym over at Pine Ridge?" Lou said, refilling her cup without being asked. Emily looked up. "Scheduled for today? 7 this morning. Ed Briggs is running the crew. Said they want the whole east wing down before winter." Emily nodded and picked up her crossword. She didn't fill in any answers. Pine Ridge High had been closed since 2005, 5 years after the school board finally admitted that enrollment would never recover from what had happened in the spring of 1994. The building still stood on Ridgeline Road at the edge of town, where the pines grew dense and the road narrowed to a single lane, a long 2-story structure of pale brick gone dark with weather, its windows boarded, its parking lot cracked and colonized by weeds that pushed through asphalt with the patient indifference of living things. For 30 years it had stood there on the hillside above Cedar Falls, like a question nobody wanted to answer. Children growing up in the town were told not to play near it. Their parents, who had grown up in the same town, didn't need to explain why. In the spring of 1994, 9 students from Dr. Leonard Hale's advanced psychology seminar had walked into that building one Tuesday afternoon and never come out. The investigation had lasted 2 years. The FBI had sent a team. Volunteers had searched the surrounding forests for 3 consecutive weekends. A national television program had dedicated an episode to what they called the Pine Ridge 9. And at the end of all of it, there had been nothing. No remains, no credible leads, no explanation that held together under scrutiny. Dr. Hale himself had disappeared the same day, and the investigation into his background had produced only more questions. A teaching career that moved from institution to institution with unusual frequency, records that were incomplete or contradictory, and a methodology that his former colleagues described as unconventional in ways they struggled to articulate. Emily had been 17 in 1994. She had been enrolled in Dr. Hale's seminar. She had sprained her ankle badly the Friday before, and her mother had driven her to the clinic, and the doctor had told her to stay off it for a week. She had spent that Tuesday on the couch watching television, while 9 of her classmates walked into a psychology seminar and became the Pine Ridge 9. She left her crossword unfinished and drove to work. The call came at 9:47 a.m. She was at her desk in the Cedar Fall Police Department going through paperwork when her phone buzzed with Ed Briggs' number. She almost didn't answer. Ed called her directly every few months, usually about noise complaints from his construction sites or the occasional dispute with a neighbor over property lines. Nothing that required urgency. Detective Carter? His voice was different. Not frightened exactly, but tight in a way she hadn't heard from him before. We broke through the gymnasium floor about 40 minutes ago. The excavator hit something under the foundation. A space. A room. A pause in which she could hear machinery idling in the background. We stopped work immediately. Nobody's been inside. I need you out here. Emily was already standing. Don't let anyone near it, Ed. Don't touch anything. There's something written on the wall, he said. I could see it from the edge. I didn't go down, but I could see it. What does it say? Another pause, longer this time. It says, "They understood the gift." She drove to Pine Ridge High with her lights on and her coffee sitting untouched in the cup holder, getting cold for the second time that morning. The gymnasium had been the newest part of the building, added in 1991 in a push to modernize facilities that the school board had been proud of at the time. Emily remembered it as a bright, echoing space that smelled of varnish and rubber, where she had sat through 2 years of physical education classes she'd mostly enjoyed, and one pep rally she had not. Now it was a gutted shell, its roof partially collapsed, its floor torn up in uneven sections by the excavator that sat idle near the east wall. Ed Briggs stood by the hole with 2 of his crew members, and all 3 of them had the particular stillness of people trying very hard not to look at something they had already seen. The hole was roughly 5 feet wide, its edges rough where the machinery had broken through older concrete. Emily knelt at its edge and directed her flashlight downward. The space below was perhaps 8 feet deep, its walls smooth and intentional, nothing like a natural void in the earth. The floor was packed dirt, and arranged across that dirt in a careful semicircle were 9 objects. Backpacks. Old, disintegrating at the seams, their colors faded to near uniformity by time and darkness, but still recognizable as the kind of thing that a high school student would carry. Emily counted them 3 times because she needed the counting to be a deliberate act, something to do with her hands and her eyes, while the rest of her adjusted to what she was looking at. In the center of the semicircle, placed upright with a precision that made the hairs on her arms rise, was a single wooden school chair. She stood and walked to where the flashlight beam could reach the far wall. The words were painted in something dark and rust-colored that she did not want to name yet. The lettering was careful, unhurried, the work of someone who had taken their time. They understood the gift. "Get back to the road," she told Ed and his crew. "All 3 of you. Give statements to whoever arrives first. Nobody speaks to the press." She called Marcus Webb, her partner of 6 years, as she walked back to her car for evidence gloves. Then she called the county forensic team. Then she stood alone at the edge of the hole for a moment and looked down at 9 backpacks arranged by someone who believed they were doing something meaningful. She recognized one of them. a green canvas bag with a broken zipper on the front pocket that its owner had patched with duct tape, and a strip of fabric from an old flannel shirt. She had been in the cafeteria when Claire Nguyen fixed that zipper, sitting across the lunch table, 14 days before Claire became one of the Pine Ridge 9. Emily walked back to her car and sat in the driver's seat with her hands on the steering wheel, and did not allow herself any of the things she wanted to do in that moment. Then she got out and went back to work. By noon, the forensic team had descended into the chamber and begun the careful work of cataloging and extracting. Marcus arrived at 10:30 and stood beside her for a long time without speaking, which was one of the things she valued most about him. Dr. Hannah Flores, from the county medical examiner's office, emerged from the chamber at 11:30, with the expression of a professional working very hard to remain professional. 9 sets of remains, she said. Preliminary assessment, they've been down there approximately 30 years. No obvious trauma to the skeletal structures. The positioning is deliberate. Whoever placed them here did so with considerable care. A pause. Detective Carter, given the circumstances, you don't need to stay on scene. I'm fine. That wasn't a medical opinion. It was an offer. I know what it was, Emily said. I'm fine. They found something else under the chair. A metal box, sealed and corroded, its lock intact. And when the forensic technician lifted it and held it up in the white glare of the work lights, Emily saw that someone had scratched 3 words into the lid with a sharp instrument. For the finder. She did not open it at the scene. Back at the department, she sat in the conference room with the 1994 case files spread across the table around her. She had read them before, many times, first when she was 18 and the investigation was still active, then again when she made detective, then periodically in the years since, during the sleepless stretches that came and went without warning. The files were familiar to her in the way that a scar is familiar. She knew every detail of their texture without needing to look. What she had not known, and what the forensic team confirmed at 3:15 that afternoon, was that there were 10 sets of remains in the chamber. Not 9. 9 students, and 1 adult male, estimated age 45 to 55 at time of death. Dr. Leonard Hale had not disappeared. He had been sealed in with his students. The metal box was opened the following morning under forensic supervision. Inside, wrapped in sealed plastic that had kept them intact against 3 decades of moisture and compressed darkness, were 3 items: a photograph, a document, and a handwritten journal, its cover marked with a single letter H in black ink. The photograph showed 9 students arranged in a circle on the floor of what Emily recognized as Dr. Hale's seminar room, a converted classroom on the 2nd floor of Pine Ridge's East Wing. They were seated cross-legged, hands resting open on their knees, their expressions peaceful and concentrated. Dr. Hale stood in the center of the circle, one hand raised slightly, as if in the middle of making a point. In the lower right corner of the photograph, a date stamp, April 29, 1994, 4 days before the disappearances. The photograph had been taken from the doorway of the room, and in the narrow strip of reflective glass on the interior window, barely visible but unmistakable to someone who was looking, was the silhouette of a figure standing behind the camera. A young woman, straight-backed, holding the camera steady with both hands. The document was 15 pages, densely typed, its title printed in the same careful lettering as the message on the chamber wall. On the question of preserved consciousness, a theoretical framework for voluntary transcendence. Emily read it twice. The language was academic in its structure, but extraordinary in its conclusions. Dr. Hale had believed, or had written as though he believed, The death experienced in a state of psychological readiness and communal surrender was not an ending, but a transition, a form of consciousness preserved at its moment of greatest clarity. He called it the summit principle. He wrote about his students as ideal subjects because of their intelligence, their openness, their trust. He described the seminar as a 2-year process of preparation. He used the word gift 11 times. The journal was not his. The handwriting was younger, more urgent. The pen pressed hard into the paper in places, as though the writer needed the resistance. The entries spanned from 1993 to 1994, and as Emily read through them, the picture they assembled was one that made her set the journal down twice before she could continue. The author described Dr. Hale's private sessions with a small group of students outside the official seminar. Described the way he spoke to them individually about their potential, their specialness, the particular sadness of watching young minds be ground down by the mediocrity of ordinary life. Described the growing certainty, reinforced session by session, that what he was offering them was not death, but elevation. The final entry was dated May 2, 1994. Tomorrow, the circle completes. I understand now what he's been teaching us. I'm not afraid. But I am not ready. I need more time. I'm not coming. There was no name in the journal, but someone had placed it in that box deliberately, sealed it, and positioned it under the chair at the center of the circle of 9 backpacks, wanting it to be found. And that someone was not among the remains. Marcus put it plainly when he came in with coffee at 8:30. Someone survived. Someone who was supposed to be in that circle, and wasn't. Someone who came back afterward, arranged everything, painted that message, sealed the chamber, and walked away. Emily turned the journal in her hands, and kept the journal as a record. A record of what? Of the experiment, she said. Of everything Dr. Hale taught. Officer Jessica Tran knocked on the conference room door at 9:15 with a laptop, and the expression of someone who had been awake for most of the night doing something she hadn't been asked to do. I went through Dr. Hale's employment history, she said. Not just what was in the original file. I went further back. She set the laptop on the table and turned it to face them. Before Cedar Fall, he taught at a private institute in New Mexico. In 1989, 3 students from his seminar there were reported missing during an off-campus retreat. The case was investigated and closed as accidental deaths, lost in the desert. No remains were ever recovered. She clicked to another screen. Before that, a school in Wyoming. 1985. 2 students, both enrolled in his psychology elective, disappeared within 6 weeks of each other, listed as runaways. Emily stared at the screen for a long time. He was practicing. Cedar Fall was the largest, Jessica said. 9 subjects in a prepared chamber. Either he'd been building toward this scale, or something went wrong with the timeline, and he ended up in that chamber with them. Something went wrong, Emily said. She looked at the photo of the young woman's silhouette in the window glass. Someone else sealed them in. 3 weeks into the investigation, when the forensic analysis had confirmed the identities of all 9 victims, and the county medical examiner had formally classified their deaths as homicide by asphyxiation, Jessica Tran pulled Emily and Marcus into the conference room with a stack of printed files and a look that Emily had learned to associate with findings that required sitting down. I ran a search for similar disappearances, Jessica said. Multiple students, same school, same short window. Schools with unusual counselor turnover. I focused on the last 15 years. She spread the printed files across the table. Belhaven Academy in Washington State, 2011. 3 students gone within 5 weeks. School counselor listed as Amy Whitmore, departed the position the same month. Case unsolved. A pause. Torrance Preparatory in Idaho, 2016. 4 students. Counselor named Laura Morgan. Resigned abruptly. Case listed as ongoing, no suspects. Another pause. Harlow Creek Middle School in Utah, 2019. 3 students. Guidance counselor named Ellen Weston left 2 weeks before the disappearances were formally reported. Marcus leaned forward. 3 different names. I pulled the photographs from school directories before they were taken down or archived. Jessica turned the laptop around. 3 photographs, each from a different institution, each showing a woman in her 40s with unremarkable professional headshots, the kind taken against a neutral background for a faculty page. Different hair lengths, different glasses, slight variations in apparent age. But the same face. The name in the school records and employee files from Cedar Fall matched when they ran it back through the original 1994 case documents. Laura Whitmore had been a junior at Pine Ridge High in 1994. Enrolled in Dr. Hale's advanced seminar. Absent on May 3rd due to documented illness, a migraine recorded by the school nurse. Her name had appeared in the original investigation's list of interviewed students. A single half-page interview, in which she described Dr. Hale as a very dedicated teacher, and said she had not noticed anything unusual about her classmates' behavior in the days before they disappeared. She had been 16 years old when she sat in that nurse's office and watched 9 people she knew walk into a seminar room for the last time. She had been 17 when she came back somehow and sealed them in. Emily drove to the house on Clover Street, where Laura Whitmore's parents had lived in 1994. The house had changed hands twice since then. The current owners, a young couple with a child's bicycle on the front porch, had no useful information. Richard Whitmore, Laura's father, had died in 2008. Her mother, Carol, was in an assisted living facility 30 miles east of Cedar Fall. Emily drove out to see her on a Wednesday afternoon. Carol Whitmore was 79, small and clear-eyed, and not at all surprised by the visit. She offered Emily tea from a small electric kettle and sat with her hands folded in her lap and said, "I wondered when someone would come back. When did you last speak with Laura? She calls every few years, different numbers. She never says where she is." Carol looked at the window and at the mountains visible through it. She was a different person after that spring. She was 16 when those children disappeared, and she had been close with several of them. Dr. Hale had made her feel very special, and then suddenly that world was gone. I thought it was grief. A pause. She left home when she was 19. She wrote to me for a while. The letters talked about continuing important work, about carrying forward what she'd been given. I didn't understand it then. She looked at Emily directly. "I understand it now, seeing you here. Do you know where she is?" "No," Carol said, "but she told me once, in a phone call, maybe 5 years ago, that she was working with young people who needed guidance, that she was giving them what Dr. Hale had tried to give her, that she was making it better, more complete." Her voice was steady, but the teacup she held was not. She said the work was almost finished. The lead came from Jessica Tran, who had not slept properly in a week, and who presented her findings with the particular intensity of someone who understood the weight of what they had found. Harlow Creek Middle School in Utah had been the last confirmed sighting of the woman using the name Ellen Weston. But the school records showed that before departing, she had enrolled in a certificate program at a private education institute in southern Colorado, a boarding school and professional development center called Summit Preparatory Academy, located in a valley 40 miles southeast of Cedar Fall, surrounded by national forest, accessible by a single road that turned from asphalt to gravel 2 miles before the gate. Summit Prep had opened in 2018. Its website, which Jessica had archived before it was quietly taken down, described a progressive approach to adolescent psychology and residential learning. It had a current enrollment of 14 students, ages 13 to 17, all boarders, most from distant families who had sought out the institution based on what its promotional materials described as its philosophy of peak development, an educational approach designed to help students realize their fullest potential before the pressures of adult life diminished their capacity for growth. The school's lead counselor, hired under the name Margaret Wells, had a faculty photo that matched the others. The local sheriff's department had received a call 2 days earlier from a parent in Phoenix who could not reach her daughter. 2 more parents had contacted the school directly and received no answer. The school's administrative contact number rang through to a voicemail that had not been set up. Emily and Marcus drove the 40 miles in 50 minutes. The Montana State Police were already en route. The Cedar Fall chief had called in county resources. Emily drove and didn't speak for most of the trip, and Marcus didn't either, which was correct. Summit Prep looked peaceful from the road, a cluster of buildings in a mountain clearing, well maintained, surrounded by trees that had begun to turn gold at their edges. 2 smaller outbuildings flanked a central structure that had been built new within the last 4 years, its foundation fresh, its gymnasium recently completed, according to the construction permits Jessica had pulled from the county records office at midnight. Thermal imaging confirmed 11 heat signatures in the basement level of the new gymnasium before Emily descended the stairs. The chamber was lit by a battery system built into the false ceiling, a cold, blue-white light that showed everything with merciless clarity. 11 teenagers lay arranged in a careful circle on the floor, their breathing slow and shallow from sedation, dressed in the same pale clothing, hands folded with the same deliberate positioning she recognized from the photographs in the 1994 case files. In the center of the circle, standing with a stillness that seemed almost rehearsed, was Laura Whitmore. She looked, Emily thought, with something close to vertigo, like a woman who had spent 30 years becoming an idea. "Detective Carter," Laura said. Her voice was calm, the practiced calm of someone who had long since finished being afraid. "I read about the excavation at Pine Ridge. I knew you would follow it here." Emily kept her weapon level. "Step away from the children, Laura. They're not in any danger. They're resting. They've been prepared for weeks. They understand what's being offered to them." She tilted her head slightly, studying Emily with an attention that felt clinical. "You were supposed to be in Dr. Hale's circle in 1994. He spoke about you specifically. He said your absence was a kind of failure on his part, that he hadn't reached you completely enough. He was wrong about a lot of things." "He was wrong about very little," Laura said quietly. "He was wrong about the timeline. He moved too quickly. He didn't have enough time to properly complete the preparation, and the result was uncontrolled. I've spent 30 years correcting that. Every subject I've worked with has been fully prepared. They choose this." Something moved behind her eyes, a grief so practiced it had become indistinguishable from belief. "I was there when he sealed the chamber. I was supposed to be inside it. I wasn't ready. I've been ready ever since." "You sealed them in," Emily said. "You came back and you sealed 9 people, including the man who manipulated you, into a concrete room, and you let them suffocate." A pause. "I completed his work," Laura said. "He asked me to." The tactical team came through the upper entrance on a signal Emily gave with her left hand while keeping her right steady. Laura did not reach for anything. She did not fight when they restrained her. She stood looking at Emily with the remote patience of someone who had been waiting for a particular moment to arrive and had now arrived at it. The 11 students were revived over the following 2 hours by paramedics who worked with quiet efficiency in that strange lit chamber, their faces deliberately composed in the way of professionals who understood they were looking at something that would stay with them for the rest of their careers. The first to come fully awake was a boy of about 15, dark-haired, confused, who looked at the ceiling of the chamber and then at Emily and said in a voice still thick with sedative, "Where is Miss Wells? She said we were starting the session." Emily crouched beside him. "You're safe," she said. "Your parents are on their way." She said it to all 11 of them, and she meant it. And she watched them return to the world with an intensity that cost her something she didn't have a name for. Laura Whitmore was arraigned in January on 11 counts of attempted murder, 10 counts of first-degree murder for the victims at Harlow Creek, Torrance, and Bellhaven, and 9 counts of first-degree murder for the Pine Ridge 9. Her defense argued diminished capacity, citing the psychological manipulation she had been subjected to as a teenager, the years of isolation, the constructed belief system. The prosecution argued deliberate methodology, sustained over decades, executed with skill and patience. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Emily testified for 4 hours on the second day of proceedings. She described the chamber at Pine Ridge with precision and without affect, described the journal and the document and the photograph, described the thermal imaging signatures she had seen on a screen in a car 40 miles from a mountain valley, while 11 teenagers were unconscious on a floor below a new gymnasium. She was asked whether she believed the defendant understood the difference between right and wrong. She said yes. She was asked nothing further. The verdict was guilty on all counts. Laura Whitmore was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole and taken from the courtroom without visible emotion, her eyes moving once to Emily's face before the door closed. The families of the Pine Ridge 9 attended the sentencing. Emily sat 2 rows behind them and watched them receive a verdict that gave them everything the law could give, and none of what they had spent 30 years actually needing. Afterward, in the parking lot, Claire Nguyen's mother found her and took her hands in both of hers and held them for a moment without speaking. Emily did not pull away. She was back at her desk the following Monday when Marcus set a folder in front of her. He didn't say anything. She opened it. Laura Whitmore's personal effects, catalogued and held in evidence, had included a laptop with a full encryption partition that the state's forensic technicians had finally broken through over the weekend. Inside were 7 years of encrypted files, communications, course materials, a network of private message boards using pseudonyms and rotating servers. At the center of it was correspondence with 14 individuals scattered across North America, each of whom had been a student in one of Dr. Leonard Hale's seminars at the various institutions where he had worked between 1981 and 1994. 14 people who had received what Hale had called the private instruction. 14 people who had received Laura's subsequent outreach over the years, who had been corresponding with her, some sporadically, some with the regularity of a discipline, about the work, about the summit principle, about what she described as ongoing experiments in preparatory psychology. 3 of the 14 had criminal records. 2 were employed in educational institutions. 1 had reported the correspondence to local law enforcement in 2021 and been told the complaint lacked sufficient basis for investigation. The report had been filed and not followed up. Emily turned the last page of the folder and looked at the window and at the mountains outside it, which were exactly as beautiful and exactly as indifferent as they had always been. She had saved 11 children. Laura Whitmore was in a cell. The Pine Ridge 9 were in the ground with headstones that bore dates that stopped at 17. And somewhere, in 14 different cities, 14 people who had been shaped by the same hands that shaped Laura were living ordinary lives, or perhaps not ordinary lives, or perhaps lives that contained rooms no one had looked under yet. She picked up the folder and walked to the chief's office and set it on his desk and said, "I'm going to need more resources and a longer timeline than anyone is going to want to give me." She pulled up a chair and sat down. "We're not done." He read the first page, and his face did what faces do when they understand that a thing is larger than they had prepared for. He read the second page. He set the folder down and looked at her. "How many?" he said. Emily thought about a cemetery where 9 headstones stood in a line in the Colorado winter light. She thought about 11 teenagers waking up in an underground room to ask for a woman who was not their teacher. She thought about a girl of 16 sitting in a school nurse's office in the spring of 1994, while the world outside the window went quiet in a way it would never recover from. She thought about the 14 names in the folder. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's what we have to find out." Outside the window, the mountains held their snow. The town of Cedar Fall went about its Thursday morning. Somewhere in the high pine forests above Ridgeline Road, an old, pale brick building stood in the cold, with its windows open to the wind, no longer keeping its secrets underground. But the ideas that had been born inside it were still walking around.